Back at it like a crack addict, automatic like a fomatic, built from tragedy, made for static. It's your boy, Perfect Timing Podcast, back with the blast real fast. 2025 won't last, and we in and out with a dash. I'm back with a mid-morning podcast from an OG perspective. 2025 won't last, so we're going to be in and out with a dash. Today we got a hot topic, and I do mean hot. We're going to discuss the Eaton fires toll on the Black community, Black home ownership, and Black business. And so today we're going to discuss Altadena, the Eaton fire, the historical Black community, home ownership, the population of people of color, the effects of redlining on Blacks in this area, and give you an overall encompassing view so you have a better understanding of what took place there. Wait to the end of the video. I'm going to give you instructions and information. I know a lot of you may be looking for information on how to donate and help the recovery and the rebuild. Our community, our people has always been about rebuilding and recovery, and this is going to be a strong recovery, and we're going to need your help. Please wait to the end of the video while I give you instructions on and links to information on how you could help with the rebuild of Altadena. Now, until the 1960s, Altadena was almost an entirely white community, largely because of redlining, the practice discriminating against people in certain areas by denying them access to financial support like mortgages. People of color and other underrepresented communities weren't able to buy homes in Pasadena or parts of Altadena because of this practice. Major societal change came during the Civil Rights era. Racist property use laws became unenforceable, and later legal actions banned housing discrimination outright, helping in the de facto practices that locked Black families out. The rise in Black home ownership in this area of Los Angeles contributed to what is known as white flight, as one of LA County's first middle-class communities to include Black people emerged. The Meadows neighborhood. The area is on the western edge of Altadena and was originally co-owned by abolitionist Owen Brown. Many Black residents in Altadena were displaced when the 210 freeway was built in the 1960s, but local organizations contributed to encourage people of color to move in between 1950 and 1960. Many Black residents in Altadena were displaced when the 210 freeway was built in the 1960s. This was a tactic not only used in Altadena, but a lot of majority Black middle-class neighborhoods in Oakland and Detroit. As Black middle class emerged, you would find throughout the country historically where freeways were used as eminent domain to break up the birth of these Black middle-class communities. I will continue. But local organizations continue to encourage people of color to move in. Between 1950 and 1960, the Black population rose. And now let's go into some videos. I want to share with you some other people who done some great work. Give credit to the content creator and some other individuals that done some great work on the history of Altadena. And after we go into history, we're going to go into explaining what is redlining, because you're going to hear a lot about the existence of Altadena existed because of something called redlining. And I believe we need to define that. But I want to show you some more of this beautiful historical neighborhood.
Altadena was the beneficiary of the Great Migration, where many African Americans moved west to escape the Jim Crow South. Altadena's open spaces and relative affordability compared to neighboring Pasadena made it an attractive destination. And by the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, a vibrant Black community had taken root, overcoming redlining and the restricting housing covenants to create a rich cultural and social network. Altadena developed a reputation as a haven for Black professionals, educators, and creatives. Notable figures such as Willa Beatrice Brown, the first Black woman in the United States to receive a commercial pilot's license, and artist Charles White called Altadena home, cementing its status as a mecca in Los Angeles for African Americans. Essential institutions emerged, including churches like Altadena Baptist Church, community organizations, and cultural events that fostered a sense of togetherness and pride for everybody. The post-World War II era brought significant expansion to Altadena as economic growth and GI benefits fueled a housing boom, filling most of Altadena's remaining open land. And by the 1950s, Altadena's population was just under its current level of 43,000. then that the area known as Altadena Meadows became one of the first middle-class African-American neighborhoods in the region and became an important site for African-American leaders, activists, writers, performers, and visual artists to build a community and make professional connections. That legacy continues through today, including one of the definitive voices in LA's culinary scene, Mona Holmes, who was born in Altadena. As such, Altadena has been known for its diversity and its strong sense of community. It's important to note also that Altadena is the final resting place of Owen Brown, an abolitionist and the last surviving participant in the 1859 slave revolt on Harper's Ferry, Virginia.
So many heartbreaking stories.
Truly, truly so many heartbreaking stories.
The LA fires have made headlines for destroying celebrity homes in Malibu and the Pacific Palisades, but many don't know how the LA Eaton fires are destroying what's left of a historical Black community. During the Great Migration, many African Americans were moving west to escape the Jim Crow South. Without the restrictions of redlining, Altadena became a haven for Black families to escape systematic racism, acquire land, and build generational wealth. By the 1980s, about 43% of Altadena was Black. Since then, Altadena has become a very affluent area, and gentrification has driven out a great number of those Black residents, but many still remain. The Eaton fires have displaced many of the Black families that still reside there, so make sure to check their GoFundMes and do what you can to help and spread their story.
Make sure you stay to the end of the video and get the links and get the necessary information so you can help the rebuild. It's all about rebuild and recovery. We are a strong people and we won't let this stop us. Let's looking at footage now, aftermath of the Eaton fire and the tolls of the Eaton fire on the residents and the people of color. So I think it's important before we go into the next segment of this video that we define redlining. Top of the Mid-Morning Podcast from an OG perspective, redlining defined. Thank you for watching.
In every way imaginable, the consequences of redlining to many Black and brown communities across America meant that those communities had the least and the last of everything. So I want to talk about redlining because this is a term you may have heard, but most people don't actually know the history. In 1933, in the midst of America's Great Depression, when unemployment rates were 25% and millions of people were not only out of work, but many of them were houseless, the federal government, under President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, established an agency called the Homeowners Loan Corporation. Basically, it tried to make home buying much more affordable by subsidizing the cost of building and lending such that people would be able to afford to buy for the first time. Millions of Americans participated, except that when the Homeowners Loan Corporation began to issue mortgages, it came up with a scheme to decide which communities were deserving of loans and which ones weren't. They made maps and used a color-coded scheme. Green meant this was a community that you could lend to, and red meant you could not. The basic decision they made was to determine that any community with the presence of Black people or brown people or people who perhaps spoke Italian in certain parts of the country could not receive support from the Homeowners Loan Corporation.
So what's important to understand is we hear a lot about redlining, and a lot of times I think it's misconstrued and not properly defined, which is why I created this video, because it's not simply about preference or prejudice of particular homeowners and individual realtors. This was about legislation and federal funds that was denied based on race. So we're talking about policy, legislation, racial legislation that we don't really talk about, right? Because if we have to talk about the honest truth about what it was, then you have to talk about the remedy. And about redlining, that's important is that it was a legislative policy and a law mandated by the government, a racial law and policy. Why do I emphasize that? Because if you understand that the government legislated racism, then you got to understand that there must be a recompense, a remedy. You still had redlining laws on the books. As I read to you, what took place is that the redlining laws were not obliterated. What happened was that culture changed and that the laws became unenforceable. Not that the laws were taking off the book. The repair that is needed, not only in Altadena, but all middle-class black communities affected by racist legislation and policy from your government.
System that came to be known as redlining because communities that were deemed risky by the mere presence of people of color, most especially black people, were disqualified from getting direct support from the federal government to purchase homes. This policy lasted until 1968 when the federal government passed the Fair Housing Act, which made all forms of discrimination in the buying and selling or renting of homes illegal. But the truth is that the legacies of redlining from that moment to the present meant that black people were subjected to other forms of exploitative lending. A system called contract buying grew up as a way to sell black people homes on a layaway plan. You made set payments over an extended period of time, but you never owned the home until the very last payment. It was very common for unscrupulous sellers to withhold that final payment in an effort to take back the home from a person who had worked incredibly hard to buy it. Home ownership has been the most...
Don't that sound familiar to what's going on in Altadena right now? Right from under your feet, your home is being taken from you. It's been burnt down. Do you guys know those homeowners still have to pay mortgage? We're going to go to a story. Please stay tuned to the end of the video so I can give you links to help the families at Altadena. And I'm going to share with you a story, a very telling story about a family who lost their home, and they details how they rebuilt it themselves and how they still have to pay mortgage even though their home has been burnt down to the ground.
Important asset that a typical white family has in order to do simple things like borrow money to send a child to college. But most importantly, they have financial freedom. But for communities that have been subjected to redlining, they didn't have those advantages. Not only that, the very communities that they lived in suffered from divestment, including the lack of grocery stores, the lack of businesses, the imposition of federal highways that often bisected their communities. In every way imaginable, the consequences...
When I talked about the freeway and the 210 and how I described, and you may disagree with me in the comments, please leave your comment in the comment section, but you may disagree with me. But when I read to you a brief historical background of Altadena, and I read to you about how they put the freeway through that community and it devastated that community, I said that that was purposely done, and it was done across the board in the United States and black middle-class communities.
So imaginable, the consequences of redlining to many black and brown communities across America meant that those communities had the least and the last of everything. And to this day, the median wages and income of those communities and the financial insecurity that people who live in redline communities face has long-term health consequences for families, has education who live in redline communities.
Now let's take a look at this real quick, real briefly. Let's look at this graph now. What is this graph saying? Because we have the opportunity here on YouTube to take a snapshot and deep dive into the video because we're reacting to the video. So this is the racial wealth gap graph, okay? So it has a by net worth and by year. It is cross-referenced by year, okay? Net worth and by year, and it has white families, all families, and black families here at the bottom. At the top trending of net worth is white families, right? And it starts back in 1989, and it's pretty much the same. It had a jump here in early 2000s, right? It had a peak, and it seems like most people had a peak when Barack Obama was elected president, right? We had a great economy. The country was doing better, first black president, right? So you have a peak here in 2008 and 9. Remember Barack Obama with qualitative easing created the most millionaires in the country, millions of millionaires. But you know, you can see black families still at the bottom, but that's a topic for another video. But here it is, 200,000, peaking above 200,000 in 2008, 2009 during the Barack Obama presidency. Seems like white families benefited more from the first black president than black families who didn't seem to benefit at all. In fact, it seems like black families are doing worse after the first black president. So you hear white families here above 200,000. You have all families around above 100,000. And then you have this outlier, ladies and gentlemen. And they say black families like we're not American, but here it is at the bottom from 1989, pretty consistent, right? The effects of redlining, the effects of racism, the effects of slavery, pretty consistent since 1989 about the worth of the black family. And this doesn't seem to be a concern despite us being loyal to the Democratic Party. This don't seem to be eye-raising to anyone, and you're expected to still remain Democrat and vote for the same policies that seem, it seems to me, if you continue to vote in the same way that you voted since 1989, then you must be happy with the trend line here. D.L. Hughley. So 1989 to 2019, black families never broke above $50,000. Let's go back to the video. I just wanted to take the opportunity here because we're reacting to the video, which may be unique for us to deep dive into some of these things that you wouldn't have the opportunity to do if we just briefly watching the video. Thank you for hanging out with us. Perfect Timing Podcast from an OG perspective, top of the mid-morning. Please like, share, subscribe, and don't forget, stay to the end of the video so I can give you the links so you can help donate and work on the recovery, because our people are strong people and we're all about recovery, and we're going to help and make sure we rebuild in Altadena. And I know you want to do so. So please stay tuned to the end of the video where I can give you that information.
Communities face has long-term health consequences for families, has educational consequences for young people whose schools often don't have the tax basis to give them the same resources that communities that were never redlined actually have.
Truly define redlining before we move forward in this discussion. Now, thank you for watching. Make sure you stay tuned to the end of the video so I can give you some information about how to donate and help those in the recovery efforts to rebuild, because we all about rebuilding. You know, in life, 10% is about what happened to you, 90% is about what you do after what happens to you. Let's get some information for people, so because I know people need the information to help them understand this event. Understanding helps people get through it a little bit better. That's why we're doing this video.
Searching. It is a very grim task. And we, unfortunately, every day we're doing this, we're running across the remains of individual community members. That is not easy work. Very sad to report. And I believe that work is not only going to continue, but I believe will continue to find remains. So please be patient with us. People are saying, I just want to go look at my house and I want to see what's left. We know that, but we have people literally looking for the remains of your neighbors. Please be patient with us. There's a lot of hazards in the area. Still, the area has not been rendered safe.
And let's take the time now to look at some of the historical families who've been there for generations, and let's hear what they have to say about the rebuild and the recovery for historical Black Altadena and the Black homeowners and the resilience that they've shown. I wanted to say a commending, great example from the individuals in Altadena of resilience.
Altadena holds a history of family, struggle, and beloved community.
At one time, we were 30% African American.
The Mountain View Cemetery is the resting place of abolitionist and educator Ellen Garrison Jackson Clark and renowned author Octavia Butler. The community is also home to hundreds of Black families whose homes were ravaged by the Eaton fire 1 week ago.
You've got 3 generations of, and we are Daniels, Franklin, Hughes, and we have an element that's not here, Freeney.
Between these families, 7 homes were destroyed.
There's generational wealth that is in question now.
One that is still standing is the home Shelley Daniels and her husband, Paul, purchased for about $16,000 in 1960.
At that time, it was pretty difficult as a Black person to get past Woodbury, really.
Shelley and Paul were engaged in racial justice efforts with organizations like the NAACP and Women in Action.
We organized in order to get a black member on the city council.
Shelley's granddaughter, Jamaica Hughes, lived in one of the family homes that was destroyed.
I've raised my kids here. Their friends are reaching out. I've had friends reach out to me literally from junior high school.
Hughes is determined to return and rebuild, a wish her 93-year-old grandmother echoes.
I would hope for Altadena to rebuild. I don't think I'll be here to see Altadena rebuild, but I do hope that Altadena rebuilds because it's a wonderful place.
Today, Altadena is a diverse community, roughly 18% African American and 27% Latino.
Give honor and homage to the diversity of our community. There's a large Japanese presence in Altadena.
Veronica Jones, a lifelong resident of Altadena and president of the Altadena Historical Society, hopes the voices of these residents are at the center of an equitable rebuilding of the city. She also has a message to the many intergenerational Black families who call this home.
They don't have to leave. It's their home. It's their place that people, years ago set down the stakes and paid the price for them to be here.
7 homes, 3 generations lost. The effect of the Eaton fires on this red line community. Please stay tuned to the end of the video so I can give you the information so you can help with the rebuild.
Was our kitchen.
Rubble and ash where a home once stood.
It's just gone. Everything is just gone.
All around them, not a house still standing.
We know these people, and these people have lost everything. It's not just us. It's everybody, and it's so awful.
Kevin and Anne-Marie Pazmino renovated their modest Altadena home with their own hands, working nights and weekends.
Every inch was a part of us.
To turn it into a sanctuary for their 2 children, 10-year-old Lucille and 4-year-old Joaquin.
We were dreaming big, and we were living within our means in a very, very tight fashion.
The Eaton fire consumed that dream and all the savings the Pazminos had put into it.
We've only been given 3 months pause on our mortgage. The interest will still accrue.
That was a TV.
And now they have to pay rent on top of their mortgage. Rent covered by insurance if they can find a place to take them.
After we're done with this, we're going to go and look to try and find some places. But it's hard because we have our dog and our cat, and so many places won't take pets. And we have to stay close because of our kids' school.
And these rentals literally cost twice as more than my mortgage. What?
And the Pazminos are finding what the insurance will pay is not enough to get their foot in the door, as thousands compete for temporary housing.
The advance for the insurance is not even nearly enough for what we are required to have as proof to try and apply for a place.
It's the plight thousands of fire victims are now facing. The fires didn't just take their homes, it took their financial stability.
We've lost this house, and we don't think that we'll ever be able to be in a house again.
While the Pazminos know their home is no longer standing, many are still unable to see the status of their property. Insurance experts say that shouldn't stop people from filing a claim anyway.
My cousin...
It's a devastating reality for families in Altadena. She said, "We lost our house, and I don't believe we'll ever be able to be in the house again." They have to pay off that house. They still have to pay off that house, even though they won't ever have a house again. They have to pay off the mortgage, the home loan, which may be upwards of $1 million in California. The interest will continue to accrue. Someone else will be living in that dwelling, and they will be paying for the bank. This is the way it works. They have to pay mortgage and pay rent. When she says we may never be in a home again, she's not being facetious. She is describing their financial outlook, the fact that they are required to pay off that loan, that home loan, which is upwards of $1 million, and still pay for their, this is what America, they worked hard and purchased a home. Some people might say, well, maybe you shouldn't have bought a home, but it's the American dream to buy a home. They realized their American dream. They bought a fixer-upper. What you see in that expose is they fixed it up themselves. The beautiful landscaping they did themselves on weekends after work. They painted, they remodeled the kitchen to create this investment and future benefits for their family. And now it's gone. But what I want people to understand, as we go into the last segment where I provide you the links where you can donate and help people like this, is that as they talk about rebuild, you need to understand that families, just like the families you may have heard of last year in fires, they're required to still pay the mortgage, pay rent on a new place. So when we think about, oh, the insurance company's gonna give them money, what money is that? Somebody said the other day, this fire cost is going to be upwards of $190 billion. No insurance company has that much money. If the insurance company paid out how much the damage, all of the insurance companies would be bankrupt. They don't have $190 billion liquid to pay out. So everybody's not going to get paid out their home worth and home value. She just said to you, what the insurance company is going to give us is not enough for us to get an apartment in the same neighborhood where our house was, because our kids and our lives and our jobs are here. And then the father said the apartment situation, he didn't even know, because he had bought this house. He was living his dream. He said the rentals are double what my mortgage was. And what he didn't want to say, and I live in $1 million home. I live in $1 million home in the hills, and the apartments, he's probably wondering to himself, like a lot of us, a lot of dads, how are regular people doing it? How are regular people paying rent that is double what my mortgage is and living and making it every day in America? And why aren't we screaming at the top of our lungs? That may be an inclination on why it is the administration changed. Let's go into the last video. I promised you information about how to donate, and I'm going to share that with you now. Thank you for watching Top of the Mid-Morning Podcast from an OG perspective. We're going to send out a prayer and a blessing to everybody affected by the Eaton fires. And thank you guys for watching. My name is Perfect of the Perfect Timing Podcast Network. I am the OG that was talked about.
To see street after street just completely burned to the ground is utterly devastating. But people are already focusing on rebuilding. Black people, we always find a way to rebuild our communities. Here are some Black families, organizations, and businesses that have burned and need financial assistance to rebuild. The Pasadena Black Equity Project is collecting funds, and 100% will go to Black residents in the area. Rhythms of the Village Cultural Center, where a lot of this footage is from, burned down and is collecting funds to rebuild. The Little Red Hen Coffee Shop, a Black-owned and operated business that has been open since 1955. A Hone family who lost their home. Sadiqa Dede Harris lost her home of 50 years. So in the caption of this video is a link to a Google Doc that has a long list of fundraisers. And if you have the means, I really hope that you will look through the list and donate some money if you can. The